As a human being, none of us have innate potential. That's a false idea. None of us have innate potential. Instead, all of our potential is relative or flexible based on who we're in a relationship with. Now, this comes from a theory called the self-expansion model in psychology. And according to this theory, all of us have what's called potential efficacy. Our efficacy is our ability to produce results. So as an example, learning how to read, or learning how to start a business, or learning how to make money, these are all skills that we have, but it's all potential skills. And our potential is based on who we're in a relationship with. So let me give a simple, practical example. My wife and I adopted 3 kids from the foster system. Back when they were living with their biological parents, before they got taken away, our kids had very limited potential because they didn't have resources to put towards their goals. Their parents weren't taking them to school. They weren't giving them attention. They were actually neglecting their kids because they were on drugs. And they weren't getting taken to school, and that's why the state came and took them away. But in that context, our kids' potential as human beings was very limited. Their expectations for themselves was very limited. In a lot of ways, your expectations for what you can do or the vision you have for your future is based on who you're in a relationship with. In this case, when they were living with their biological parents, they didn't have much expectation to do anything with their lives because their parents had no expectation. Actually, in psychology, that's called the Pygmalion effect. The research shows that your expectations or your belief in yourself about what's possible is based on your leaders, or based on your parents, or based on your peers. And in this case, not only did they have a very capped potential or capped view of what they could do with their life because they just lived with what was normal. Their parents' view of what was normal was to not go to school, to not graduate, to live off the state. And so that was their view of what was normal. So not only is their projected view of the future limited by who they're in a relationship with, but also the resources they have to put towards goals. That's where, according to the self-expansion model, your efficacy as a person is based on the resources you have to put towards goals, and those resources come through your relationships. So in the case of my kids, they didn't have a lot of resources to put towards their goals because their parents didn't have very much resources to give them. Now, resources aren't just money. They're also knowledge, perspectives, the identities that you have, the belief systems you have. They're all sorts of things, emotional support. Our kids did not have very much resources to put towards their goals, and so their potential efficacy or their ability to produce results was incredibly limited. When you change their context and you put their kids in mine and my wife's care, and we're far from perfect parents and we are far from having unlimited resources, but their potential efficacy as a person changed dramatically by being in a relationship with us. Now all of a sudden they had routines, they had food, they had after-school tutoring. We actually took them to school. We traveled the world. We showed them new experiences. And so because they now had a new level of resources to put towards goals, they expanded as a person. Their efficacy expanded. And that's really how our potential grows. Our potential is based on the resources we have towards our goals, and those resources come from other people. And those resources, again, could be knowledge, they could be perspectives, identities, they could be money, they could be networks. And so there was a research study recently that looked at what are the different types of people that ultimately create self-expanding relationships. Now, the self-expansion model says that whenever you develop relationships with people, you develop relationships with people because of the potential for self-expansion. So if you want to get a mentor, for example, you want to get into a mentorship relationship because you believe that will expand you by getting the knowledge, the mental models, the belief systems, maybe the network, maybe the connections of a mentor. You can expand as a person. We all have a desire to expand and we all have a desire to grow. And according to one study, and I'll link to it down below, a study asked the question, what types of people are more likely to aggressively get into self-expansion relationships? Now, in psychology, motivation is often broken into 2 categories. One is approach and one is avoid. If you're approach-oriented, you're very clear on what you want, you define what you want, and then you approach that, and you're willing to take risks to approach your goals. Whereas if you're avoid-oriented, you often spend your energy avoiding what you don't want. So as an example, there's a lot of research on high hope versus low hope people. High hope people are really clear on their goals. They're willing to be flexible at finding better and better pathways to getting to their goals. They find media and study knowledge, or like, let's just say read books or watch videos that help them achieve their goals. Whereas avoid people, they're not flexible with their approach. If it doesn't work, like if they try to move forward towards their goal and they hit resistance, what they do is rather than learning and using that as feedback, they actually avoid the situation, avoid the hard moments, and actually then distract themselves. They distract themselves either with media or just getting themselves out there. And so low hope people are usually avoid oriented. Or avoid-oriented people are usually low hope because they ultimately engage in behaviors that stop them from increasing their hope. So you want to be approach-oriented. You want to define what you want, and then you want to approach it. You want to be on offense rather than focusing so much on avoiding what you don't want. And what this study showed is that approach-oriented people are far more likely to engage in self-expanding relationships. Approach people are far more likely to identify relationships of mentors or people they want to be like, and then learn how to develop relationships with those people. They're more likely to take risks. They're more likely to actually seek those relationships and expand as people. Now, here's where it gets really interesting. Dan Sullivan, the co-founder of Strategic Coach, has a model he calls the gap in the game. And this is a model about how to ultimately, first off, appreciate your progress, being in the game rather than being in the gap, comparing yourself to others or wishing things were different. When you're in the game, not only do you appreciate your own progress, but you take your experiences and you transform them to clarify what you want. So this is part of the self-expansion model, is ultimately clarifying what you want and then developing relationships that can expand you as a person and help you get there. By the way, this is a big aspect of deliberate practice. Deliberate practice is basically the psychology of expertise. And this is how you can become an expert in anything. And one of the core aspects of deliberate practice is ultimately developing the mental models or the belief systems or the views of the world of the people at the top of the field. So as an example, if you wanted to deliberately practice at tennis, you would ultimately want coaches or to learn from people who are at the top of that game who understand it. You want their mental model. You want their view of the world, because if you can see the world from their perspective, you can then solve your problems better. So deliberate practice largely requires you to develop the mindset, the models, the belief system of those who are at the top of the field. Now back to Dan Sullivan for a second and the gap in the game. Life sometimes gives you experiences you don't want, or sometimes you end up making mistakes or failing or going through experiences, but those experiences can ultimately be gains if you use them to refine and clarify what you want. Because the more you can define what you want and then communicate it to other people, the more you can engage in self-expansion relationships, the more you can actually advance yourself as a person. You've got to first off define what you want and communicate what you want. So let me give a super practical example. For some reason or another, my wife and I have been really bad at finding a great accountant. We've gone through accountant after accountant after accountant, and we could easily be in the gap about that. When you're in the gap, you're just frustrated by what's happening. You're wishing things were different. And when you're in the gap, you're the victim. So instead of getting better because of your situations or because of your experiences, you become bitter. You think that life is happening to you rather than that life is happening for you. And so when you're in the game, rather than being upset at what's happening, you actually just critically look at what's happening. It's called problem-solving focus in psychology. And you say, what can I learn from this? You take your experiences to ultimately refine and quantify what you do want. And that's what we were able to do recently. After having another bad accountant experience, we were able to sit and say, okay, clearly we need to learn from this. What actually do we want in an accountant? What do we really want? You've got to clearly define what you want and almost make your own rules or your own measurements of success. And that's what we did. We're like, okay, we want to find an accountant who's very good at communicating, who works with small business owners, who can meet with us at least once every 3 months to just make sure we're on track, who doesn't leave us in the dark, who gives us peace of mind. Like, we laid out the measurements of success in that area. And then from there, we were able to go and find the accountant and then communicate that clearly, and we're able to find an amazing accountant. Now, the point of this is that you have to take your experiences and use them to define what you want. The more you can clearly define what you want, and this is the biggest challenge that most people have, is that they're not clear on what they want, and they haven't clearly specified what is the metrics of success. The more you can clarify the rules or the metrics of success and then communicate that, the more you can find those relationships that can expand you in the right ways. Once we clearly defined, my wife and I, once we clearly defined the metrics of success for an accountant, then we were able to start communicating that, and we were able to find an amazing accountant. And then from there, we were able to start the relationship from a clarity perspective. And one of the major reasons why people don't utilize relationships in a transformational way. So there's transformational relationships and there's transactional relationships. One of the reasons why most people's relationships are transactional, or ultimately they fail, like they fail in divorce or they just don't work out, is because both parties don't come to the table with clear metrics of what they actually want from the relationship, and then from there they can have a joint purpose at helping each other transform and get the results they want. So what Dan Sullivan calls this is that you've got to want what you want. You've got to clarify what you want, and you've got to communicate what you want in order to attract the right types of people. Now, Dan clarified what he wanted after going through some hard experiences in 1978. And again, he's been coaching successful entrepreneurs for over 45 years. But in 1978, he went bankrupt and got divorced the same day. And it hurt so bad that it forced him to clarify what he wanted. He started journaling every day about what he wanted. And so you can use challenging experiences to clarify what you want, but the more you clarify and quantify what you want and then communicate it to others, the more you can approach the right types of people. It's that whole idea that when the student is ready, the teacher will appear. Well, part of what makes the student ready is that they've clarified what they've wanted, they've specified what they've wanted, and then they can communicate what they want in a very transparent manner, and then they can use that to create self-expansion relationships. And now another kind of built-on concept that Dan teaches is he teaches a concept called always be the buyer. And by the way, down below are 2 free ebooks that Dan gives. One's Wanting What You Want, the other one's Always Be the Buyer. But always be the buyer is such a powerful idea. Basically what Dan says is there are buyers and there are sellers. Now, if you're the seller, you can get rejected. Just as an example, if you're walking, through a car dealership, someone's trying to sell you a car. If you're the seller, you can get rejected. If you're the buyer, you actually can do the rejecting. And so you don't want to be the seller. You don't want to be someone who's desperately trying to get someone to buy your buy what you're offering. You want to be the buyer. You want to be someone who can reject others. And the only way that you can reject others is if you're really clear on what you want and clear on the metrics of success. If you're clear on what you want, then you can find the people you want to be in a relationship with. Sometimes, obviously, you will get rejected, which is fine. But the more you own what you want and the more you say, this is my metric. For example, my wife and I finally became the buyers. We said, this is what we want in an accountant. And then we started reaching out to multiple accountants, and we could reject the ones that ultimately couldn't provide what we wanted. So you got to clarify what you want, and then you got to go be the buyer. Being the buyer means that you're the one who says yes or no to people, whether they want to be in a relationship with you, and you ultimately choose the relationships that you want that are ultimately based on your criteria that will help you expand in the ways you want, and you ultimately can help them expand in the ways that they want. You can create very powerful, very transformational experiences, and also this is just a powerful model of taking life, the experiences of life, and using them to learn. Life will give you lots of experiences. I have friends, for example, who have gone through so many tragedies. One of my great friends, Richie Norton, his brother-in-law died randomly, who was 21 years old in his sleep. His son, Richie Norton, and his wife, Natalie, their son died. Another son got hit by a car. Natalie, in her 30s, had a stroke and lost her memory. Luckily, she got that back. But they've had just tragedy after tragedy after tragedy, but they've always been in the gain about those experiences. Rather than being in the gap and being upset and becoming bitter, they just used these experiences to become better. They also used these experiences to clarify what they want, to clarify their value system, and then ultimately to use that clarification, what they truly want, to live the life according to much more powerful rules. Just as an example, Richie talks about how because of the tragedies he's gone through, he now realizes he could die any day. And so he doesn't procrastinate taking big, bold action towards his goals. He also lives his life as an entrepreneur from his cell phone in Hawaii because he set up his life that way because he just wants to live his life a certain way. He wants to have time, location, freedom. And so his hard experiences helped him truly clarify what he wanted, and he used that new clarification to be the buyer for how he spends his time, for who he engages in relationships with, for the type of money he makes. So all of this is to say, as a person, your potential is flexible. It's flexible based on who you engage in relationships with. When you engage in transformational relationships with people, you expand as a person because you get the other person's resources. When you engage in a mentorship, or when you hire a coach, or when you develop a collaboration, you get their resources to some degree. You get their resources in terms of knowledge, their identity, their perspectives, their mental models, their skills, maybe their capital, their network. When you engage in relationships, you expand as a person, but you also expand other people through your knowledge, skills, relationships, maybe money or emotional support. And so you expand as a person, and your potential to create results is based on the relationships you're in. If you're an approach-oriented person, you take your experiences in life, good and bad, to refine what you want. That's being in the gain, as Dan would say. And as you clarify, refine, and quantify what you want, and then as you get better at communicating that, and then using that to approach the relationships that will help you expand in desired ways, and obviously you could help them expand in desired ways, you can create transformational relationships, and you can make quantum leaps as a person. You can expand as a person, and then you can start to get really thoughtful and creative about what are the types of relationships that I want that will expand me, or that I can help them expand in the most powerful ways. This is how you expand dramatically as a person. This is how you make quantum leaps as a person. This is how you ultimately engage in transformational relationships. It all comes down to clarifying what you want, using your experiences to continually hone and refine what you want, being able to communicate that to others, and then aggressively approaching your future self through relationships, through transformational relationships. Where are you currently at in your career hierarchy? Are you living paycheck to paycheck? Are you living project to project? Or are you living adventure to adventure? This is an image created by Gaping Void. Gaping Void is an amazing culture design company. They create amazing art. Actually, all of the pictures behind me are created by Gaping Void. And this picture is a fun place to look at and to assess where are you at in your career hierarchy. Are you living the paycheck to paycheck mindset? That's where everything in your life is based on paycheck to paycheck. Are you at the project to project? Projects may be like 6 months, a year, it even could be 2 years. Project to project is different from adventure to adventure. I actually think that I'm probably in the project to project stage myself. A project for me could be writing a book. Right now I'm writing a book. I've got the next book. I'm kind of going project to project. Adventure to adventure is where you're at a stage in your career where you have at least a 3 to 5 year journey. And that journey takes you to a totally different place. It could be starting a business. I might be in adventure to adventure. I think 4 or 5 years ago, I was on the blogging adventure. Now I'm on the book adventure, and I've got a few collaborations. And then I don't know what my next adventures are going to be. But if you're someone who's in massive growth mode, someone who's constantly striving for novelty, newness, growth, self-expansion, then you're living the adventure to adventure stage. And when you're in the adventure to adventure stage, then you can make massive progress because you give yourself bigger timelines. You also pursue bigger goals. You pursue goals that are honestly adventures, that take you places you didn't necessarily know you were going to go. There's actually a really cool theory in psychology created by the Harvard psychologist Robert Keegan. And it's a 3-step model. The bottom step is where you're the socializing self. And the socializing self means that you're dependent on others for what you want. You worry about what other people think, you're trying to fit in with other people. You then go to a next stage where you're at the authoring self stage. And the authoring self is where you've gone from dependent to independent. Independent means that you now have your own goals, you've got your own agenda, you pursue things that you want. The highest level, though, of this model is called the transforming self stage. And the transforming self stage is where you develop collaborations, relationships with other people. You both have your own goals, but through the process of that collaboration, you both transform as people. And I think that that fits the adventure to adventure stage, where you're pursuing a huge adventure, you're pursuing a huge dream, and it transforms you all throughout the way. The paycheck to paycheck model doesn't necessarily need to transform you as a person. Your time horizon is a lot shorter. Each of these has different time horizons. Paycheck to paycheck, your mindset is like, what's going to happen next week? Project to project, it's like, what's going to happen the next quarter? What's going to happen the next year? Adventure to adventure, you're thinking like, what's going to happen over the next couple years? Like, what's the thing I'm creating right now? I like the adventure to adventure stage because you really can become an expert at something. You can become profound at something. You can create something life-changing over a few year period, like a 2 to 5 year period. You can set something up and create something that completely changes your life. You can become an expert at something. You can create something. You can, just as an example, it was about a 3 year period of time, 3 or 4 year period of time when I spent a lot of time blogging. I wrote hundreds of blog posts, and that ultimately led me to becoming a professional writer. But through that process, I was able to go from a novice writer, someone who didn't know how to write, to becoming an expert writer. And there's a lot of research in the field of psychology on the subject of deliberate practice. Deliberate practice being the way in which you develop expertise and become world-class at something. And if you're living in the adventure to adventure mode, it's okay to start as a beginner. And actually part of the fun is going from, being someone and somewhere to starting fresh, becoming a new beginner. But you can leverage the knowledge, the skills, the capabilities, and even the experience of your former self and your former adventures to the next one. Just like when you're on a project-to-project basis, you can do a project, you can learn from that project, and then you can use what you learned and maybe the capabilities you've gotten, the network you've gotten to improve future projects. I love this picture though because it just invites you to think, where are you at in this hierarchy? Are you living adventure to adventure? Are you on an adventure, or are you just getting a paycheck? Are you doing projects that are bigger and more powerful, or are you just getting a paycheck? And paycheck doesn't have to be week by week. You could be, these are different mindsets more than anything. Are you in the paycheck mindset? Are you in the project mindset? Or are you in the adventure mindset? I would argue that if you're in the adventure mindset, you have more of a self-mastery orientation. You're doing things that you value. You're doing things you strive for. You're doing things that stretch you. You're intrinsically motivated. I think the lower you are, the more externally motivated you are. And according to self-determination theory, External motivation can be powerful. It can lead you to doing things, but it doesn't ultimately transform you as a person. It doesn't lead to mastery. Whereas the higher up you go, the more masterful you can become. You're on an adventure. You're trying to transform. You're trying to grow. You're trying to actually create or accomplish something big. And so the lower you are on this, the more externally motivated you are. And again, this is more of a mindset. You could be someone who ultimately is getting paid paycheck to paycheck. We all get paychecks, but it's how you approach it. Are you someone who's on an adventure? Are you seeking mastery? Are you seeking growth? Are you seeking transformation? Or are you just getting gigs? The project to project mindset is the gig economy. You're just getting gigs. You're not necessarily on a big adventure that could create something massive and change the trajectory of your future self. The adventure mindset means that you're totally in it for the adventure. Yes, you're creating outcomes. Yes, you're pursuing big goals, but you're creating mastery. You've got a bigger time horizon. You're seeking for and striving for the adventure in and of itself. You're really enjoying it. You're internally motivated. You're transforming. You're not trying to get out of it. It stops being necessarily a means to an end, but like the whole adventure itself is the end. And you're just enjoying the adventure. You're excited about where it's taking you. You don't necessarily know where it's leading you, but you're committed to that next step, that next stage, and you're just pursuing it. And then whatever the next adventure is, it's okay if it's a total pivot. That's the cool part about the adventure to adventure model, is that it's not always linear. Sometimes once you get done with a certain adventure, you pivot to something totally different. As an example, one of my professors when I was an undergrad, he published so much. He was a gratitude researcher. He spent years studying gratitude, and he published like 60 plus academic articles on gratitude. But then he got sick of it. He got a little bit bored. And so he decided to pivot, and he went straight into real estate. And then he spent the next 5 years growing a massive real estate investing platform where he's got dozens of houses and he's in an amazing place. But now he's kind of getting bored of that. And so he's excited for the next adventure. And so the adventure to adventure stage allows you to really create mastery, to really transform yourself, to really transform your situation. And then it's okay if you jump to a totally different adventure. It's okay if it's a total pivot into a totally different direction. That's why the adventure to adventure stage is fun, is because you're doing what internally motivates you. You're, from a self-determination theory perspective, you're doing what you want. You're doing what you're intrinsically motivated to. You're enjoying the journey, and you're letting that take you places maybe you didn't initially expect to go. So, where are you at on this mentally, emotionally? Where are you at? What's your mindset? Are you just driven by quick external wins? Or are you on an adventure that's transforming your life? Committed to something really big? Are you creating something really meaningful? Or are you on the project to project where you're kind of somewhere in the middle? You're motivated, you're doing bigger projects, you're growing, you're creating bigger gigs, you're maybe taking more ownership, maybe more on that self-authoring stage where you're creating things, but I would say you're not actually, you're still living in the one-off situation. You're still doing gigs that are one-offs, but you're not establishing something that's going to ultimately pay you for the rest of your life. And so I think that creating things that will pay you for the rest of your life, creating recurring revenue streams, thinking longer term about your future self, being on an adventure versus just project to project. Are you on an adventure right now? And I would say you are on an adventure right now, but maybe you haven't framed it that way. Maybe your mindset's still in the quick external wins level. The British rowing team was bad for a really long time. They had not won a gold medal since 1912. But right before the 2000 Olympics in Sydney, they did one thing, one strategy that allowed them to win the gold medal.
Goal for Great Britain! Olympic champions! Olympic champions!
It was a simple question they asked, and there's a lot of research that backs up why this worked. So the question they asked themselves was, will it make the boat go faster? They asked themselves this question before anything was presented to them. Eat a donut? Will it make the boat go faster? Stay up late with friends? Will it make the boat go faster? Will it make the boat go faster became their filter for everything they did. In psychology, there's a concept for creating a filter. It's called implementation intentions. It means that you actively plan for failures or setbacks and you have a strategy that becomes automatic. So they said automatically when presented with something that might have thrown them off, will it make the boat go faster? Therefore, they didn't have to think about it. Once they got presented with something that could have derailed their goal or their commitment to winning the gold medal, they had their automatic strategy. Will it make the boat go faster? They asked themselves that question. If the answer was obviously a no, or it was unclear, then they removed it. Tim Grover was the performance coach of Michael Jordan, Kobe Bryant, Dwayne Wade, many of the world's best basketball players. And he has a very powerful quote. He said that you should crave the end result so bad that the hard work becomes irrelevant. Stephen R. Covey actually had another similar idea. He said, in order to have something, you must be willing to pay the price. You can have anything you want. You can't have everything. You can have anything but not everything. But in order to get what you want, you have to first define what you want, and then you have to find out what is the price. And then you have to ask yourself, am I willing to pay the price? The British rowing team was very willing to pay the price, and they won the gold medal. They had a strategy that was the filter for their price. They said no to a lot of things that maybe they would have wanted to say yes to, but they were willing to pay the price. And so that's the question I have for you is, do you know what you want? Do you know what the price is? Are you willing to pay that price? And are you willing to put in a strategy, an implementation intention, or a filter that filters everything you do and everything you say yes to your goal? Dan Sullivan, the founder of Strategic Coach, talks a lot about how 10x thinking is a lot easier than 2x. Having a 10x goal is really powerful, and there's a lot of research that actually shows that high and hard goals are more powerful than low goals because it's so big that it motivates you and it gets you excited. But in order for that to actually work, you have to use the goal or the 10x vision as your filter. And you use that to determine what you say yes to, what you say no to. If you're willing to say no to everything below the commitment, you have a filter and you say no to everything below the commitment, then you can reach your goal. That's actually how you demonstrate your commitment, is saying no to things below your commitment. The more committed you are to your goal, the clearer your filter has to become for your decision making. And as you say no, you will become your future self. This video is going to be a doozy. I'm going to present to you some ideas that will hopefully rock your world, blow your mind. They are not fully refined. I'm still working these ideas out in my own head, and so I apologize for that fact. But there are 3 very big ideas that, if you understand, can help you elevate your life very quickly. They can also help you realize potentially why you're not moving your life forward as much as you want. The first one is an idea in psychology called inattentional blindness. Inattentional blindness is the idea that there are infinite things going on all around you, opportunities, situations, people that you're completely unaware of because you're so focused on or distracted by whatever it is you're focused on. As one easy example, Bitcoin. Bitcoin is something that more and more people are becoming aware of, but maybe in the past they were blind to. And maybe, there's this whole mania around Bitcoin right now, and people are kicking themselves because why weren't they aware of it? Or why didn't they think more deeply about it when they'd heard of it the first time? Maybe back in 2010 when it was $1. If they had invested in it back then, they would now be a millionaire, a billionaire. So we're all blind to a lot that's around us. Actually, William James, the Harvard psychologist, he's the father of American psychology. He said that there are millions of things going on all around us that we're blind to. And the reason we're blind to them is because we're focused on what matters to us. Our experience is whatever we pay attention to. Your experience is whatever you pay attention to. William James then said, there's one difference between the genius and the ordinary person. It's not the fact that the genius has a better ability to focus. It's actually what the genius places his attention on that other people are blind to. Albert Einstein was able to put his attention on to see and to notice the laws of relativity, whereas other people are still blind to the dimensions of relativity. So the first one is blindness. And my question to you is this: what was your former self blind to that you're now not blind to? That's a really great question. What are you currently aware of, and what are you currently pursuing and seeking that your former self, could be a year ago, 2 years ago, 5 years ago, had no clue of? What are you now aware of, seeking, and pursuing, or striving for and creating in your life that your former self had no perspective of? Your former self hopefully is more blind than you are right now, but the same is true of your future self. Your future self knows more than you know. And so an obvious question is to ask yourself, what is your future self focused on, aware of? What do they value? What are they worried about? There's a great quote. It's a Chinese proverb, and it says, the best time to plant a tree was 20 years ago. The second best time is today. And so if you want to think about what does your future self want, what should you be focusing on now? In order to actually live intentionally, you have to start thinking about where you want to go. And this brings up the second concept. And it's actually, in a lot of ways, the exact opposite concept of inattentional blindness. It's actually called strategic ignorance. So strategic ignorance is where you're strategically making yourself blind to things you don't want to be aware of. It's about creating a filter and boundaries of your attention so that you don't let certain things in. So one question is, what are a lot of things that you're currently aware of, or currently focused on, or currently distracted by that you should be blind to? In other words, what should you be strategically ignorant of? There's so many things going on out in the world today that are irrelevant to your goals or to your situation or to your values, but chances are you may be distracted. And so what are all of the things in your life, in your world, that you should become more blind to? In other words, what can you become more ignorant of on purpose. This is one of the good reasons why you would want to remove news and media. As an example, Peter Diamandis, who is a futurist, he is blind on purpose to mainstream media because it's not helpful to his goals. He sees the biases. He doesn't see value in it. Seth Godin, the famous author, he's chosen to be strategically ignorant of how people review his books on Amazon. He used to read the reviews of what people would say about his books, and he realized it was not helpful to him. And so he's chosen to be strategically ignorant. He's chosen to create rules or boundaries or a filter for his mind so that he no longer needs to see anything that's going on there because he knows it's ultimately distracting him from his purpose. Question number one is, what are you currently blind to that your future self would like you to start becoming more aware of and start thinking about so that you can start mentally preparing for those opportunities or those situations? Because right now there's things coming in and out of your orbit that you're probably not aware of because you're so focused on whatever you're focused on or distracted by whatever you're distracted by. There's once-in-a-lifetime opportunities that present themselves to you all the time. You could call them little tests that pop up and appear, and you may fail those tests because you're either underprepared. You may fail those tests because you don't even notice them because they slipped by. Now, you don't need to be worried about what you've missed in the past. The question just becomes, what do you want to be focused on? What do you want to become prepared for? What do you want to actively prepare for right now so that your future self will thank you later? That's step number one. Step number two, what do you need to become strategically ignorant of right now? What do you need to block out so that you can actually focus? In order to create wealth, you need to create concentration. Concentration is how you create wealth. Diversification is ultimately how you protect wealth. That's what I've heard, at least. So all of this brings us to the third idea, which is selective attention. Selective attention is the idea in psychology that we all do have a worldview, and that worldview is shaped by what we give our attention to. Dr. Stephen R. Covey said, we see the world not as it is, but as we are, or as we've been conditioned to see it. We all have a mental filter. Dan Sullivan said, your eyes can only see and your ears can only hear what your brain is looking for. Now, if you want to be a conscious, intentional human being, then what you need to do is you need to decide what you want to direct your brain towards. Your brain is always looking for something, and whatever your brain is looking for, that's what your eyes and ears see. We see selectively. We don't see the whole world as it is, but we see the world as we are, or as we've been conditioned to see it, and as we've trained our brain to see it. And so what do you do now? How do you take all of this? It's 3 simple strategies. Number 1, realize that right now, you're currently blind to a lot of things that your future self is going to be aware of. The sooner you think about what your future self wants and what they're up to, then the sooner you can start becoming less blind and you can start becoming strategic and begin actively preparing for that. You can rid yourself of the blindness that's currently potentially stopping you from taking massive action. Another great thing to do, though, is to continuously reflect on the progression you've made from your former self. This is what Dan Sullivan of Strategic Coach would call being in the game. Taking time to look back on what your former self was thinking about, what they were doing, what they were pursuing, versus your current self. Your current self now knows things that you used to be blind to. Actually, Daniel Kahneman, the author of Thinking Fast and Slow, he was recently interviewed by Adam Grant. And Adam Grant basically asked him, Daniel Kahneman, do you see the world the same way you did when you wrote Thinking Fast and Slow, like 10 years ago? And Daniel Kahneman was like, no, I totally see so many things that I didn't see back then. And Adam Grant was like, well, how do you feel about that? And Daniel Kahneman was like, I'm so excited about that. But then Adam Grant said, well, how does that make you feel about the book? Because the book, is limited based on what you knew in the past. And I loved what Kahneman said. He basically just said, that's all right. That was a reflection of where I was at back then. So there's no point in being mad at your former self. It's actually very powerful to recognize and appreciate the growth of what your former self saw, what they were ignorant of, what they were pursuing. Just as an example, 7-8 years ago when I was in my undergrad, I wasn't necessarily thinking about finances. I wasn't thinking about setting up my life and developing passive streams of income because I was so focused on my schoolwork. So I was blind to opportunities for building wealth because I was so focused on getting A's on my classes. And so I'm not mad at my former self, but I can also see the progression. I can see that right now, the things that I see, the things I'm aware of, the things that I'm pursuing, the goals that I have, the way I define success are all very different from my former self. But the same is also true of my future self. And if I want to live my life intentionally, I need to be first off aware that my current self is very limited. My current self is blind to many things that would potentially be advantageous to my future self. And the sooner I think about what I want my future self to be, the sooner I can start removing the blindness. In psychology, your motivation is either approach or avoid. Rather than trying to avoid what you don't want, which is a willpower way of trying to make change. What you want to do is you want to clarify what you want, and then you want to spend your time and energy approaching that. The more you do something, the more you'll want it. The more you'll do something, the more you start to see more and more of it. There's a great quote from Robert Kiyosaki. He said, "Intelligence is the ability to make finer distinctions." Finer distinctions means your worldview gets clearer and clearer and more specific. Rather than trying to avoid what you don't want, you clarify what you do want, and you just feed that. You feed that beast, and you start to develop clear and clearer perspective of it. You become more of an expert on it. You start to see distinctions. Where someone sees one frame, you see 50. You get a more clear expertise and perspective, and you can then move that forward. So approach what you want rather than trying to avoid what you don't. Clarify what you want, and then really educate yourself on that thing, and you'll start to become less blind, and you can actively prepare right now for your future self. What other people think about you is none of your business. At a certain level, you need to get to a place in your mindset and your identity where you can trust yourself, where you can own what you want, and you can hear people, you can get feedback, you can get advice, but at some point or another, you're the final say. And you do have to walk away from even what your friends, family think, what your friends on social media think, and even what your mentors or even your teachers say. At some point or another, you've got to be the one to decide what you want, and you've got to go for it with everything you've got, and you've got to get to the place where you're like, it doesn't really matter what other people say. This is what I'm going for. I'm going to own this. I'm going to do this. According to the self-determination theory, which is one of the amazing theories in motivation, we all need to get to a place of pure intrinsic motivation, pure autonomy, pure competence, pure freedom. And that level of freedom, that level of motivation means that you've blocked out all external reference points, external noise. You're just purely autonomous in what you're doing. You decide what you want. You decide the level you're going to go to. Yes, you can use resources. You can get teachers, things like that. You can have aids, and you can even have competition to some degree, but you're the one who's purely decided what you're going to do. You're doing it for the sake of the thing. You love it. You've got your motives, you've got your reasons, and it's purely self-decided. There's actually a really great quote from Naval Ravikant. One of the things he says, happiness is a purely internal game. You can't have any external validation. There is no external progress. At the end of the day, as human beings, all progress is internal. It's a one-player game. And if you're still playing on the outside, if you're still competing with other people, if you're still trying to get other people's approval, then you're actually playing a multiplayer game, and you're not actually making any progress as a human being. At some point or another, you realize happiness, success, progress is all an inside job. It's an inside game. That's why the self-determination theory is so powerful, is because at some place, you get to a point where it's just pure intrinsic motivation, pure autonomy. You choose what you want, and then you decide the price you're willing to pay. So that's one of the first levels, is what other people think about you is none of your business. The next level is ultimately deciding what you want and then not worrying about the price that's willing to be paid. You've got to pay the price. That's one of the things that Stephen R. Covey said. He said, you've got to decide what you want, and then you've got to be willing to pay whatever price is required. And there is a price. There's always a price. You've got to give up what you've got for what you want. Now, it doesn't mean you have to give up everything. It's not like you've got to go and be a monk, but you've got to be willing to pay the price. If you want to get in elite physical shape, there's a price to be paid. If you want to become a millionaire, there's a price to be paid. If you want to become a professional author, there's a price to be paid. If you want to reach a certain level of spiritual development, there's a price to be paid. Tim Grover, he's the author of Relentless. He was the coach of Kobe Bryant, of Michael Jordan. He was the health trainer of those guys. He said that once you are so committed to the outcome, then the hard work becomes irrelevant. It doesn't really matter anymore. You become really committed to whatever process is required and whatever change is required. And so that's another level you need to get to, is that you're so committed to what you want that you're willing to pay whatever price is required. Whatever price that may be, that's probably going to require you to let go of a lot of the things you're holding on to, maybe some bad habits, some bad belief patterns, your fixed mindset. Whatever it is you want, it's up at this level. You've got to give up what you're holding on to that's holding you back. You've got to give up maybe some behaviors, some attitudes, some addictions, some distractions. So the question is, what do you want? And what is the price that would need to be paid? Do you know what that price is? Do you know what it's going to require of you to become that? There's a great quote from Jim Rohn. Jim Rohn said that you should have the goal to become a millionaire, not for the $1 million, but for what it would require of you to become in order to be a millionaire. There's this power of becoming that is why you set the goals in the first place. This is, again, why it's an inside job. What is the target you're seeking, and what is it going to require of you to become to have that? Ultimately, that's the end game for everything, is what you become as a result of what you're pursuing. You pursue a goal because it allows you to become something more. And so that then invites you to think, well, what goals are most powerful and what goals are most important? Because what's the end game of that? The end game is whatever you become as a result. A lot of people, they chase goals and outcomes, And the end product, which is who they become, isn't what they wanted. They're still looking for something else. And so what are you going to become by chasing this? And also, what are you going to become by paying the price? By paying the price, you will transform as a person. Let me give just a few simple examples. I remember when I decided I wanted to become a professional writer, I was nowhere near that in my skill or even my mindset. But I knew that there was a price. There was a price that had to be paid. I had to learn how to build an audience. I had to learn how to write. And so by going through the process, by paying the price, it transformed me as a person. The same is true of any endeavor. In psychology, they call it deliberate practice. When you're paying the price, which is actually learning, practicing, trying, letting go of the fixed mindset, really seeing your future self, getting help, transforming your priorities, your views of the world, and ultimately becoming who you want to be, that price will transform you. It's a beautiful price. The process is beautiful. You do want to fall in love with the process. And that's step number 3, is that you become flexible in your process. You own so much on an intrinsic motivation level that you're actually doing the thing for its sake, but also because you're so committed to what it is and what it represents. You're committed fiercely to the outcome. And as the saying goes from William Hutchinson Murray, the moment one commits oneself, then providence moves too. All sorts of events come from the decision. Once you become fully committed to the decision, then the world becomes your aid. Then you become fiercely committed. When the student is ready, the teacher appears. All of a sudden, resources come. You start to see things you didn't see before. Once you get super committed to something, then you train your brain to see it. It's called selective attention. You train your brain to see what you're looking for. What you focus on expands. So committing fully allows you to see the world from the perspective of your commitment. And that allows you to weed everything else out. Dan Sullivan, the founder of Strategic Coach, actually says that 10x thinking is easier than 2x. It's easier to have a 10x vision of your future self than a 2x vision, 2 times bigger. Because with 2 times bigger, you don't necessarily need to change up everything you're doing. You just probably need to work harder. And working harder isn't the best way. When you 10x your vision, literally think about any metric in your life. It could be your income, it could be your time off of work, it could be your revenue, it could be your investments, whatever it is. Take whatever goal you have and 10x it. In order to actually do that, you would need to fundamentally change your process and probably change your identity. But what Dan talks about is that if you really commit to going 10x, then you have to shape a 10x filter. Your worldview becomes 10x, and you process everything through that 10x filter. Will this help me go 10x or will it not? It's very much like the English rowing team. Once they had the goal of going gold and once they committed to that, they asked themselves the question, will this make the boat go faster? That became their filter for everything they did. They went out to a meal, they were offered dessert. Their question, will it make the boat go faster? If the answer is no, then bang, you don't do it. Go out to a party, will it make the boat go faster? Nope, we're going to bed early. You need to have a filtering process for everything you do. That's part of the price you pay. And you get to a point where you love that process. It becomes an end in and of itself, even though it is a means to the end that you ultimately want. And so part of this, a beautiful thing, is that you let go of the need for outcomes in the short term. Everything you do, you just do it for the love of it. You do it for the pureness of it. You just do what you fully feel is right. Pure autonomy, no worry about what other people think. You just do it for the genuineness of it. And then you let go of the need for outcomes in the short term because you're committed to the outcome in the long term. You let go. That, in other words, you become insanely in flow with your process, insanely genuine with your process, and you've let go of the need for outcomes in the moment. Because you're committed to the outcome in the long term, you've let go. As it's been said before, you become so committed to the outcome that you become flexible in the process. And there's a lot of research on this, a lot of research on hope as an example. And people who are high hope, they're so flexible in their process. They're willing to develop many workable paths to their goal. Whereas people who are low hope, they just try the same thing over and over again. And if it doesn't work, they give up. And then they justify their reasons for not succeeding. You want to just be in so much flow, so much joy, the process of learning and letting go of temporary outcomes along the way, that you're willing to find whatever works best. You're willing to just be comfortable doing what you feel is right. And then ultimately, through the deliberate practice process, you can study your work, you can study your process. You're a true student of yourself, and you're also a true student of what you're doing, and you've fallen in love with the process. You've fallen in love with the process, yet you're committed to what you ultimately want. And once you're at that level, then you have complete freedom in what you do. You have complete freedom to try, to fail, to experiment, and you can just let it go. which then takes me to stage 4, which is having short-term extreme sprint experiments. When you're at the high performance level, it's less about marathoning, even though the whole thing is a marathon, wherever it is you're trying to go, your future self. But in the short term, you're doing sprints and recovery, sprint recovery, a lot of high intensity deep work, and then you recover yourself. So as an example, you could give yourself a short-term 1 to 3 month experiment. Let's just say you want to, be a painter or a photographer. You give yourself an insane output goal. Maybe if you're a photographer, if you're used to maybe making 100 cool pictures a month, you shoot for like 500 pictures in a single month. You just, you make it an insane goal. You go for extreme volume, extreme output. And then after that, you then can reassess. Once you've gone through this extreme output and you've really maximized output and creativity over consumption. And that's one of the big things you'll know. If you're serious, if you're committed, you're going to scale back the consumption, and you're going to certainly scale up the quality of your consumption. The quality of your consumption, whatever you consume, is going to become higher and higher grade, and you're going to be able to block out more and more of the distractions. Scrolling through Facebook, scrolling through social media, that stuff is so non-valuable to your future self that you'll stop being able to justify that. And you'll become more of an output rather than an input machine. Your inputs will be higher quality. They'll be more purposeful. Any input that comes in will be for the purpose of nutrition, not just for entertainment. So think about it. When you eat something, and really the purpose of input anyways is for nutritional value. The reason we need to eat is to nourish ourselves and hopefully to strengthen ourselves. But because we live in such a consumer society, we input things for the sake of entertainment or for numbing ourselves, and ultimately it ends up being bad for our output. The purpose of input is to improve our output. And so if you're, as the saying goes, garbage in, garbage out, but anything you eat should be for the purpose of nutrition. And you can obviously have entertainment. It's fine to rest, recover, have entertainment, but you want to think, what is the ultimate purpose of input? Inputting information is to upgrade your brain, upgrade your thinking, upgrade your process so that you can make better decisions, so that you can see the world better. But if you're just inputting garbage food, garbage media, then you're actually making your ultimate system worse off. You're making your software system, you're making your body worse off so that your output becomes garbage. So the purpose of input is to improve your output. And your output is your thinking, it's your performance, it's your mindset, it's your words, it's how you live your life. How you live your life on the outside is based on what you're letting in on the inside. As Zig Ziglar said, your input determines your outlook determines your output. Your output is your performance. And so what is the quality of input coming in? You can know you're serious when you become output focused, when you start to organize your life for creativity, for output, for whatever work you're doing. If you're a business person, if you're an entrepreneur, if you're a creative, you're doing more and more output. You're throwing more and more work out there and you're throwing it into the world, and you're training yourself to get better and better at output, better and better at performance, better and better at what you're doing. And the more output you do, the more you'll improve your process, the more feedback you'll get, the quicker you can iterate, the faster you can learn. And this is part of becoming courageous. The more committed you are, the more courageous you'll become. And creativity at its purest level, in pure intrinsic motivation, is a courageous act. It takes courage to fully trust yourself, to fully go for what you want, to fully go for what you believe. It takes extreme courage. It takes less courage to just compare yourself to others or to try to do what you think other people want you to do. That's a really low level. That's actually what Stephen Covey would call being dependent. If you're trying to do what other people want you to do, if you're still seeking social approval, if you're creating things in hopes that people will love it. Obviously, you want people to love it, but really you want to get to the point where you're just creating it because that's what you believe you should create. Whether it be the business, whether it be your performance at work, you're doing what you believe you should, and you're doing it the way you believe you should at the highest level, and it becomes less and less about how it's appreciated by other people. It's more about you're doing it because at the fullest level, you're doing what you believe you should. At the level you should. You set your own target. You become your own reference point. Remember, it's a one-player game, as Naval Ravikant said. Happiness, success, those things are purely internal. There is no external validation. There is no external progress. It is just an inside game. The outside is just a reflection of what's going on inside. So those are some of the keys to let you know if you're becoming hyper committed. There's one other level, and that's very connected to all the others, and that's that you become extreme approach focused. Approach focus means that you're not avoiding what you don't want. You're not overly trying to stop yourself from what you don't want. You're just approaching your target. You've clarified your future self. You've clarified your target, and you're just fully approaching it. You're no longer worried about what people think. You can then ask people for advice. You can ask for support. You can ask because you're not worried about the opinions of other people. It's like a student who really wants to know in a class. They're not afraid of asking the dumb question. They're just fully approaching. They just want knowledge. They just want skills. They just want to get there. They're not worried about what their other classmates think. They don't care what their teacher thinks. They just want to know the truth. They want to know the answer. And so when you become super approach motivated, then you're approaching your future self. You're willing to pay the price. You're outputting rather than inputting. A lot of people just input for the sake of distraction. They even gain knowledge and even read great books for the sake of avoiding the work that they should be doing. Stephen Pressfield calls this resistance in his book, The War of Art, and also his book, Turning Pro. He talks about how amateurs, they feed into resistance. Resistance means you're distracting yourself from the work you should ultimately be doing. You're inputting rather than outputting. You're doing anything you can but eating the frog. And so you know that you're a pro and you know you're committed, you know you're serious when you start putting the important before the urgent. As they say in the productivity world, it's eating the frog. You put the worst first. You wake up and you start outputting. You then even train your mindset and your subconscious for more output, for higher quality output. The inventor Thomas Edison said, never go to bed without a request to your subconscious. Never go to bed without thinking about the problem you're trying to solve. Even Reid Hoffman, the founder of LinkedIn, said when he goes to bed, he thinks about the problem he's trying to solve. And then he lets his brain work on it while he's asleep. Your subconscious always works while you're asleep, and it solves so many problems when it's not encumbered by your daily thought process. When you're asleep, bang, learning, memory, all those things 10x. And so if you think about your problems that you're trying to solve, if you think about your future self, if you think about your goals you're trying to accomplish, you visualize it right before bed, and then you wake up, and rather than inputting, you go straight to output. You go to your journal, you dump your thoughts. You just write for 5 to 15 minutes about your goal, about the problem you're trying to solve. You will see so many pearls of insight. You will see so many pearls of wisdom within your subconscious that you're just dumping out because you're outputting. Josh Waitzkin, the author of The Art of Learning, talks a lot about this in his interviews with Tim Ferriss, about outputting first thing in the morning and getting subconscious breakthroughs. He calls it crystallized intelligence. This is something you can get very good at. And then you can get to the point where at the end of the day, your brain just starts sparking off insights, and then you put them in your journal, you think about it, you wake up, and then you have so much creativity, so much output. And so you want to put the important before the urgent. You want to output before you start inputting. You want to eat your frog and put the important, putting your future self, putting your commitment before the busyness of the day. Schedule your appointments for the afternoon. Keep your phone on airplane mode until after you've outputted for at least 60 to 90 or 120 minutes. Eat the frog, put first things first. You'll know you're committed to your future self when it no longer requires so much resistance to just get up and start outputting. You're just outputting, you're creating, you're moving forward, you're getting feedback, and you're no longer worried about what people think. And then you have complete integrity. At the end of your day, you feel great because you've done your work first. You've faced resistance, you've done the job, you've moved forward, and you're increasingly becoming self-determined. Self-determination theory, that's where I started in the beginning. You're playing an inside game. You're committing to your own level of success. You're no longer comparing yourself to other people. You're no longer seeking external validation. You're playing your own game. It is a single-player game. You're playing a single-player game right now. Your input shapes your outlook, but also your inside game shapes what's going on outside of you. And the more confident you can get in your own self, and the more happiness you create as an inside game, that you're not seeking it from external levels. You're happy because you're living your life the way you believe you want to. You've defined success for yourself. You've defined the game for yourself. You are actually living it out yourself. You no longer worry about what people think. You're just owning it. You're paying your own price. You're going through your own transformation. That is the game. My name is Dr. Benjamin Hardy. Right here you can get the next video to the Future Self series. Please like this video, subscribe. Down below you can get a link as well that will take you to my Peak State Checklist. Peak State Checklist has been downloaded over 800,000 times. Click the link, you can get that. It'll show you how to get into a peak state first thing in the morning. Have an absolutely amazing day. See ya.